I'm Dave Wiesdock, Sage of Creative Scaffolding.
And I'm Jenn West, Professional Rebel of Delight.
And this is Shadow Casting. All right, welcome back, everybody, to our podcast. Jenn and I were talking this week, and we have been talking a lot lately about our tagline for Shadow Casting, celebrating our humanity. And, I think it's one of the things that we mention a lot in our podcasts in various episodes. I think it's a way that we tie it back to kind of the bigger picture or the goal for why we do shadow cast. We're looking at how our shadows cast outwardly onto others. And part of that is learning how to recognize that others are also casting shadows. And sometimes those are conscious or unconscious. And we don't have to. As we learn to come from a place of compassion and space and grace with ourselves, we learn to approach everyone else's shadow casting with that same sort of mindset, that perspective. And when we do that, that's, I think, how we lean into celebrating our humanity. And I realize that we've never really kind of broken that down. We always make a nod towards it. And what better way to break down our tagline in a podcast than in a podcast?
Yeah, it's the only way to do it is to decide that that's going to be the focus of our podcast, is to talk about it. And I love our celebrating humanity, but I can imagine that our audience might get confused on how they're supposed to do it, because we're always talking about the only one time that we spoke about it in any detail was our very first podcast, which was almost a year ago. So it makes sense for us to circle back around. Now that there's more content, let's talk about what we're actually experiencing when we're celebrating humanity.
Yeah. And where I would love to start is where we start with our work with our normal kind of clients and the people that we work with is definitions. Because I think having a common shared understanding of our language is going to help us as we go through this sort of journey and exploring our tagline. So for me, celebrating is what comes to mind are like the holidays and birthdays, anniversaries, work promotions, any sort of thing that has a sort of joyful and happy connotation to it. And I think that that's what will come to mind for our audience a lot, but there's a deeper level to me, and that celebrating also comes from a place of compassion. It's recognizing that sometimes our humanity has things we need to work on, our shadows. And so by celebrating our humanity, Jenn celebrating hers, Dave celebrating his, I think we learn to build that compassion towards others. And so celebration becomes this way of shifting the perspective, of finding common ground and learning to empathize with others around you and building a common connection. And that's where I think the definition of humanity comes in. It's the idea that we all share this common area, like we all share Earth together. We all have a shared experience in this adventure of life. And by celebrating what we share, I think we grow stronger as a species.
That's a great way to put it. And what I really love about what you just said was the celebrating our humanity first. And I think that's a linchpin to being able to celebrate outward. Because if we can't celebrate our wins and the work that we're doing, there's no way we're going to give anything outward to somebody else in a real way. I mean, there's a lot of people who give their friends and their parents the benefit of the doubt, and they're kind of harsh on themselves. But we're talking from a deep inner, I've done something, I've celebrated who I am, and now I'm taking that and I actually see another person clearly.
Right. And I think you hit on a great point, which is celebrating is active. It is not a passive thing. It's not, oh, I celebrate my humanity because I embraced my shadow. No, it's something deep within. It isn't something that you even consciously do. It is this sort of unconscious awareness that comes from within the more you work on your inner self. And the idea is that as you continue to build this foundation, it expands outward almost as like flowing out of you. Is the analogy that comes to mind. And so to me, this all starts with you've kind of got to dig into the inner work, inwards, and looking at yourself because I forget the quote specifically, and I'm paraphrasing it, but it's along the lines of the cliche of like everyone is a mirror of yourself. Everyone is a reflection of how you see yourself. You're or maybe a non-humanity way of looking at this, if that's a little too touchy, is you can look at a lot of people talk about when they're in a funk or they're kind of down, they like clean their space around them. And the external space is a reflection of the internal space. It's that same kind of thing. We tend to project what we are dealing with in ourselves outwardly. And so by learning to do the inner work inward, it really does shift the celebration and the connection of humanity outward.
And, our audience might be asking, why are you celebrating? What made you decide that? Because it really is the unfolding or filling up your own cup and it starts to drip out to everybody else where it just spills over into everybody. But that could be anything. You could be celebrating, or you could have compassion for humanity, or a growing kindness with humanity, or a unity with humanity. And we specifically chose the word celebration and what came along with that.
I something else came to mind that's really cool about celebrations. Earlier I mentioned ways we celebrate anniversaries, birthdays, etc. And I realize now in what you were just sharing, Jen, that celebration are moments. And that's really what this is, because I think you're really hitting on it. Celebrating our humanity, the ideal, the big picture would be that that is a constant flow, a constant space that you're in. But that's really hard to get to, and that's not easy. And so, for starters, honor the moments where you can celebrate your humanity or someone else's. And as the moments build, you'll start to create this kinetic chain where celebrating is something that, as I was saying earlier, starts to come from within. But that's sort of the end goal. I think we need to start with how do we get to the celebrating our humanity? How do we start building into this space where we can celebrate our own humanity, let alone anyone outside of ours? And I think we kind of have, I wouldn't say a formula because it can change, but we have a way. I think it starts with the inner work. Would you agree with that, Jen?
Definitely. It doesn't happen by focusing on celebrating humanity. You will never get there. It'll be surface level and fake. It all comes from the work you do on yourself.
Right. It's just like when you go to the gym, and I think I've used this example a few times now. If you want to lift 300 pounds, but you haven't lifted weights before, you got to start at the 5 pound dumbbell, right? You've got to build up to where your goal is. And the 5 pound dumbbell, I think, is the inner work in our humanity. Now, here's the fun thing. Oftentimes, we have this gift of recognizing our own shadow in someone else. And I think that that is a place I want to start with, because to me, this connects to the idea of celebrating our humanity within and without. So, a really simple example, let's say you're a boss at your job at work, and you have an employee that just shows up 1 to 2 minutes late. Not that big of a deal. They get their job done, they get their work done. They're a good employee. They just characteristically show up 1 to 2 minutes late. And it just kind of pokes at you in a way that you just don't understand. And you lean into, well, our company policy is that you show up 15 minutes early or at least on time. And so you stick to your policies, and that's not really celebrating our humanity, because there's no curiosity there. There's no delight at all. It's a very rigid structure of approaching someone else that's crossing a line. And the crazy thing to me is that often, not all the time, oftentimes when those little pokes happen, sometimes that's something that we have to work on ourselves inside. And so in this analogy, in this example, maybe this boss is skirting the line somewhere. Maybe they're showing up 1 to 2 minutes late at work. And so, it's in psychology, they call it like a reaction formation. It's this idea that you're reacting to get something external to you because you yourself are forming it within yourself and you don't like it. And so it's easier to correct someone else's behavior because then you don't have to do the work yourself. what happens is as you start to get that clue, you start to go inward and ask yourself, where am I struggling with, in this example, trying to be on time to work? Where am I struggling with the effort it takes to make sure that my alarm's set on time, to make sure that I get out of bed when I need to make sure that I'm, out the door at a certain time to get to work. And all these little things are really hard micro changes to make. And that's kind of the point of this first part. They are hard. And it's that struggle that is the key to the next step.
That's the whole thing. We don't actually see other people until we've gotten into the dirt and really fought for it ourselves. You could think about anything that you've worked hard on, then when you see a professional doing that thing. So let's just imagine that you like people who dance. Like you watch dancers all the time and you watch their moves, whether they're break dancers or contemporary or whatever. And it's dance. It's pretty, it's fun to watch. But when you start moving your own body and you start to learn a little bit about how those moves happen and the work that goes into them and the strength and flexibility and control of single body parts, then when you watch a pro, you have more knowledge of that and you see the detail and the intricacy of what they had to do to get to the level they're at. And you can also see a beginner and you can see what they're not quite doing. And you could see where they're working hard and how they're trying. And you totally know the fails because you've done all those fails. And you really appreciate both the excellence and the struggle because you've done it, you've seen it, you've been it, at least at some area. You're probably in the middle going, that guy is so amazing. How did they ever get there? And that's what it is. That's what celebrating our humanity is about. It's looking at the person who's a little below you on the path and cheering them on and seeing the person that's above you on the path and finding inspiration from that person.
Ooh, so you're leaning into one of our favorite tools of perspective and context.
Oh, yes, you got to.
Oh, that's awesome. I think that that's a great point. You're kind of no, you really are hitting at the key there of the struggle. Going back to the gym example, when I see someone lifting 300 pounds, I'm seeing a result, not the story, not the struggle, not the days where this person had to convince themselves to get out of bed, to put on their gym shoes, to show up to the gym, to push themselves to lift the weight. We don't know what they went through. We're just seeing a result. I think where this boils down to is really starting to honor the struggle and recognize that there is one. And this gets there's a little finessing and nuance here because when I say honoring the struggle, I don't want to say that we're not saying that the struggle is bigger than us. Is I think how I'm trying to phrase this. I'm trying to make sure that our audience knows that we're not going into victim language here. We're not saying, oh, we're going to struggle. The universe is against us. There's nothing. No. What we're saying is recognizing that when we said, hey, we're going to the gym at 4:00 after work, that we recognize that you can commit and be as good intention as possible. But between 9 a.m. when you set that intention and 4 a.m., there's a lot of stuff happening. Work happens, family happens, outside influences happen. Maybe you didn't get to eat as much that day. And all these struggles are part of what makes getting to that goal kind of enjoyable. It gives it that rich sense of fulfillment. And it happens when we honor the struggle, not when we rise or fight against it.
Yeah, it's funny. It just made me think of, is it the Buddha who said life is suffering? I think it's a Buddhist saying. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
All life
And,
is suffering.
yeah, all life is suffering. And what if he wasn't saying that in a bad way? Because lots of people take it as, yes, life is suffering. But no, it doesn't have to be suffering. It could be, yeah, suffering. What is that called these days? Type 2 fun. And so you've got type 1 fun, which is going to an amusement park, riding rides, hanging out with your friends, going to a play, whatever, just It's easy, it's fun, it's in the moment fun. And then if you go on Instagram or something, there's type 2 fun. And that's where while you're in it, you're like, oh God, oh my God, this is, and you're hiking and it's hard and maybe it's cold and it's suffering. And then you get to the beautiful view and you're like, oh, I love hiking. Type 2 fun. It's the work that you have to put in that makes it worth the while. And
Yes.
I was once talking to a friend and we were talking about suffering. And it came down through the course of our conversation that there's two types of suffering. There's the suffering of not doing the thing you want to do or feeling bad about yourself or being the victim and you just suffer. Or there's the suffering of taking action and changing and creating new things and being uncomfortable, where something is actually evolving. It's still suffering, it's still hard, but you're getting something. There's something worth celebrating at the other end.
Yes. Yes. And I want to hold space for that and have our audience sort of flip this now. Again, it's celebrating our humanity, ours and outside of us. So, just like Jen was sharing, as you start to have that type 2 fun, you sort of make a game or play out of the struggle, referencing our podcast of the failing. Highly recommend going back to that. And there's this sort of nuance that happens. And I really like that we're doing a podcast on this because Jen and I are going to come from a little bit of different perspectives in the sense that she's a little further along on this part of this honoring the struggle than I am, in that I'm only a decade into learning and using these tools. And there are so many nuances that are just becoming apparent to me. And what happens is as you start to honor the struggle within, you want to start to quote unquote celebrate the struggle of others outside of you. And again, while good intention, they need to start learning how to lift their 5-pound weights before they're lifting 300 pounds like you are. And what I think happens, at least from my perspective that I'm learning, is that the enthusiasm overrides the compassion and the empathy. In other words, when they start saying, oh, I couldn't get out of bed today to make it to the gym, I have in my head their goal, their vision of hitting that 300-pound PR, and they're not there. And so celebrating our humanity also means meeting the person where they're at and having the compassion and empathy to help guide them towards the goal that they have set, not the one that's in your head. Because if you're projecting onto them when you're trying to quote unquote celebrate their humanity, I would actually make the argument that you're almost the antithesis of that, the opposite of that. You're sort of saying that your humanity for some reason has more of a voice over the other person. So really, especially in today's day and age where things have become a little bit more polarized, this is even harder work. This is really, really hard work. Speaking from someone that has just started to learn how to meet a person where they're at and guide them, there's never an end to this journey of learning how to celebrate our humanity. You just kind of figure it out a little better each time.
Yeah, and I hear where you're coming from, Dave. We're kind of talking about the ego of finally doing the thing and starting to have success.
Yeah.
And we all go through that phase where it's like, if I can do it, you can do it because I am a total screw up. So if I can do it, you can do it. And if I just cheer you on hard enough, you will want to do it. And then if you don't, I get frustrated and angry and resentful because you're just not trying hard enough. Right?
Right.
And that happens to all of us. If you're in that place where you're like, why can't they just do the thing? I did the thing. Why can't they do the thing? I'm here to help. I didn't even have anybody to help. Why can't they do it with my help? And they're not there yet. You have to remember your struggle of even getting to that point. And sometimes that takes a really long time because there are a lot of mental blocks that need to be either suffered, where you're just like, no more. As you get to that place where it builds up and it's no more, or you've done a lot of the little work over time where it starts to rise up out of you. And that takes a lot of time. And once you're already in it, you're just like, just do it, because I waited too long. If I would have done it, I'd be lifting the 300 pounds, but I waited. So don't wait like me. It's an
Right.
ego thing.
Right.
And it takes a while to get over.
And I think in a way you rob the person of their struggle,
Yes.
right? Because part of the journey is the struggle. You, part of the journey is the struggle, period. Full stop. And to me, this reminds me of the quote slash poem that I believe both you and I love from Brene Brown, where she reads the quote from Teddy Roosevelt about being in the arena. It's not the opinion of the critic that counts. It's about what you're doing in the arena and getting up every day, no matter what. And I think that kind of takes it into this next spot of once you sort of recognize that you've got to do the inner work of your own struggles, once you recognize that the struggle is part of the journey and you kind of build some empathy and compassion both for yourself and for those outside of you as a type 1, I very much need to remind myself to have some compassion for myself. And then what happens, and as Jen was just so beautifully leading us towards, is that this is a daily act. This is a daily commitment. This is about consistency. And here's the craziest little secret I think we will ever share on one of our podcasts. Consistency does not mean perfection 100% of the time. Consistency of effort is consistency of willingness. The desire every day, every moment to get up, no matter what day or moment before it happened, and recommit to you celebrating your own humanity. Because the more fortitude and discipline and perseverance you build in celebrating your own humanity, the more compassion and empathy you'll cultivate for yourself, which will just kind of extend outwards.
Yeah. Yeah. And in the end, it does rise up as you slowly build the skill. And you will go through that point where you cheer people on too hard, and you get resentful to the people who don't listen. And then that'll kind of start to fade. And the next rising up is not only cheering those who do the really hard work that are ahead of you and the people holding hands with you going through it, but also the people who are not there. And you will just have a celebration for they're where they are. And that's okay. They're where they are, and that's what they're going to be. And you'll know when you're at that point because things that used to bother you about what they did, you've cleaned up in yourself. It's no longer in you. So they don't reflect you anymore. And so you just see their struggle. Think about when you see a little kid and they're angry because of just something little, something that little kids are angry about, maybe a cookie that they weren't allowed to have before dinner. And they're just angry and hurt. And they think their parent hates them and they should get the cookie because they're a good kid. And that feeling. You're like, oh God, I would love a cookie too. But you have, willpower. and you've got forethought, and you could think about the consequences of having cookies before dinner and how if you eat a whole bunch of cookies, they're going to make you sick. You just have life experience. And so you just feel the compassion because you know what it's like to want a cookie that bad.
Right.
And that's what you start doing with adults. You start to see that they just haven't gotten to that part yet, but you've cleaned that part up for yourself.
Yeah. And, it's kind of funny. When I was in a Cairo school, one of the jokes that everyone used to make is for every one function we know the liver, there's about 100 functions we don't know. I think that kind of applies here. For every one shadow we kind of see in someone or in ourselves, there's probably about 100 that we don't see, don't know, aren't aware of. So use that to sort of build your compassion and empathy too. Just because you've gotten to a spot where you're doing a lot of the inner work doesn't mean that you're just completely free of your shadows too. I think what happens is you start to build again that perspective of we're all in this shared journey together, I've kind of figured out some secret sauce for my stuff. And by being, and where I was kind of getting at with this earlier too, is that Jen has this sort of invitational space with her, because as you start to build compassion for yourself and those around you, it becomes inviting. It can be scary, which can be to some people if they're really in their shadows, but the kind of the fun of it too. Again, it's how serious are you, being serious or sincere in your struggle? Are you making the struggle bigger than you are, or are you recognizing it's part of your journey and you can either have fun in it and figure out fun ways around it, or are you going to rally against it and believe that some sort of cosmic force is working against you in some way? Or
You could choose that.
you could choose that.
Some people
What?
do. When you start to see it, one of our people that we work with came to us recently and said, I don't want to choose suffering anymore. The suffering of things not going well, the victim. And they saw it and they realized they were choosing it. And they said to themselves, I don't want that anymore.
Yeah.
I'm going to step out of that. I'm going to choose differently. And that's a huge step. It's a huge step. Even if nothing else changes, the realization that suffering was where they were looking and what they were looking for, big, big.
Absolutely. So I want to sort of focus on the point too of, again, this is daily small steps that we need to do. And that can look vastly different from person to person. For me, when I started, one of the small steps I needed to do is to get out of my head and into my body. And so, begrudgingly, and after many months of being persistently pestered by a certain person, certain raven, uh, it was just 2 minutes. All they wanted me to do, all Jen wanted me to do was 2 minutes of, I think it was Tai Chi. And that was it. And you would not believe the months of resistance I had to doing something for 2 minutes. But that's just where I was. And now I look back at that a year or two later, or actually maybe even longer than that now. But I look back at that and I laugh, because now that's so ingrained, or so integrated within me, that that's just kind of become a part of who I am. But it wasn't because I ignored the struggle. It's because I embraced the struggle and found a fun way to go through it. And by doing that and by learning this lesson of the struggle, I got the gift of celebrating that part of my humanity and recognizing in others when just 2 minutes is hard for them too.
Yeah, when that's just the biggest thing. There's no way I can make time for 2 minutes. I've got this to do and that to do. And then it
Yeah.
really is, when you think about it with the logical mind later, it's absurd. And when you're in it, it's perfectly logical. It makes the most sense that there's no way you can do those 2 minutes. And there's all of the brain stuff saying why. It's crazy. We as humans are stupid funny. It's absurd, the things that we do to ourselves and the stories we tell ourselves that that are just hilarious. I mean, just hilarious when we look back at them.
Oh, absolutely. And
Celebrate your nuttiness.
so celebrating our humanity, tying this together, really isn't about perfection. And I bring this up again as a type one because I'm always in the mindset, not always, I'm learning to be in the gray, but I have this default of what's the most ideal, what's the most perfect, what's like the big picture idea. And it's not really about that. It's not about fixing all these little things. It's not about pretending that the struggle doesn't exist or that life isn't full of messes. It's rather about celebrating our humanity, is finding joy in the struggle, in the mess, finding the beauty in it. And I think we do that through what we were talking about, these small daily wins of, it's just 2 minutes. It's just 3 minutes. It's just 5 pounds. It's just 10 pounds. It's the building up of the momentum and the confidence and the compassion within yourself. And then that sort of ripples out into how you interact with others.
So here's what I'd suggest to the audience. After listening to this, as you make your way through your day, along your travels, wherever you are, look for people who are ahead of you on the path that you're going down or going up, pretend it's a mountain. There are going to be people further along than you. They're going to see more. They're going to know more about the trail than you. Think about them and aspire to follow in their footsteps. And then with grace, look at where you are and be happy that you've made it to the place that you are. Just celebrate for a moment that you are where you are, that you're alive and you're in whatever position. And then you can look back down the trail to the people who are starting, whether that be children, teenagers, other adults that are maybe your age but haven't done the personal work yet. Look down and cheer them that they're on the trail at all. And just allow that energy to flow through you for a week. Just see what it feels like to be okay with the people who are ahead of you, okay with where you are, and cheering the people on who are below you on the trail, and see what that brings to you.
Yeah, that's a great sort of challenge, Jen. I love that idea.
Yeah, so hold on to the energy of celebrating. Celebrate as much as you can. Any win, celebrate, and celebrate your humanity and the humanity of others. And yeah, see where it goes.
Yeah. And, as always, be sure to subscribe wherever you're listening to, drop a like, give us a comment, and share the podcast out from wherever you're listening from.
And until next time,
See ya.